we will now have the opportunity to hear the full, as much as is possible, the story of the British Black Poor. And there is one person who has been curating the story of not just the British Black Poor, but the connection between Sierra Leone and Britain, and the history also of the Creoles. She's been doing it in such an exemplary fashion. She's no other than Iyamide Thomas. Born in Sierra Leone, she's a chemistry graduate of the University of London's King College and works for the Sickle Cell Society. She's also a historical researcher, and a lot of us have come to appreciate what she's done recently in collaboration with museums in the UK. She also is behind the site Creole.com. It's a small team of people that are committed in showing this unique history, culture, and heritage around the Creoles. And at the center of that history is the British Black Poor. And in 2019, she initiated and co-curated a temporary Creole exhibition at the Museum of London Docklands. And so when we placed this together, we knew we had to put this segment of the British Black Poor in her hands so that she brings it to life and lets us appreciate the story of these men and women that were part of the province that started the Province of Freedom, Granville Town, and later were part of those who were united with the Black Loyalists on August 24th, 1792, during Freetown's founding year. Iyamide Thomas, it's all yours from now.
Before I share my screen, I just want to say a few words, of introduction, and thanks for that. The One Journey story, this part that I'm going to deliver is going to be between myself and Dr. Michael Siva. Michael he's a true historian. I can say that I am a curator, since you mentioned the exhibition I did, but my background is not history. Having said that, it was one of my strongest subjects at school in the first few years of secondary school. But my interest re-emerged when I joined the Creole Descendants Union. And so after that, we started educating about Sierra Leone. I will give a background to the Black Poor, how their situation in London arose, what was done about it, and then I'll include a few individuals who were part of that Black Poor and how relevant they were to Sierra Leone. Also, I'll cover Black abolitionists who were activists in the movement to end the slave trade, because we sometimes forget or get involved in the narrative that Britain's historic role, in the abolition of the slave trade was left with, upper class people like William Wilberforce and Grenville Sharp, and we don't include the narrative of resistance. So I'm glad that Amadou did his bit as well, because enslaved people took part in resistance. They were did physical rebellions, mutiny, all sorts of things, armed warfare. Some, a lot were hung for it and all that sort of thing. But they were involved in the campaign. So yes, so I'll touch on, I think, 2 Black abolitionists. So we mustn't forget that the struggle for abolition, was done by others rather than just British and, non-Africans. The Black Poor then left ships for Sierra Leone, but some who had initially signed up didn't go. And that's where Michael comes in. I'll introduce Michael later because he's done a lot of stuff around the reasons why some decided not to go on those ships and go to Sierra Leone. After Michael speaks, I'll come back on and talk a bit about how we've highlighted the Black Poor and Creole history here in London and some of the markers that are around, which will tie in with what African Curator is trying to do to get markers around. So that's just a summary of what you'll hear in the next hour, and there'll be plenty of time for discussion, I believe. Yeah. Now, one of the things that one other bit that I didn't put in the bio was prior to the exhibition, I'd actually done something in collaboration with the British Library and the Royal African Society. That was in 2017. We were part of something here called Africa Writes. It's an annual event held at the British Library where they bring in international authors, discussions around books and all that sort of thing. And in 2017, we did Creole creative writing workshops, 3 in fact, and on the last day, people who took part could showcase their work, you know, to visitors. So one of the people that did that was a young man called Joe Faulkner, and he actually wrote a poem called "I Am the Black Poor," and I thought that was quite apt for us to play Joe's poem to start off.
I am black and I am African, proud of my roots, but so far away that I feel removed. I am black and I am British. Do the two correspond? Born and raised here, so I must belong. Maybe you can answer because I've been confused. I represent both, but they say I'm not true. They were black and African, forcibly removed, coerced, convinced, but not told the whole truth. They were black and they were British, but an eyesore for most. Could it be that the mother country was not the best host? They were strong and brave, enduring misery unimagined, and it is their journey that first sparked my passion. Your pain and your suffering cannot be compared, but the plight of the black poor is still in the air. You are the forefathers of the Creole man's soul, and we must ensure that your story is told.
Did you hear that?
Yes. Yes.
People heard that, did you? Yes?
Yes.
Great. That's good. Joe, I love his shirt. You see, he's really being patriotic here. But also he used to run, prior to the pandemic, Joe ran something called the Creole Canteen spelled with a K. So he's quite an entrepreneur. He did supper clubs and used to do stalls at events and things. This was before the pandemic. So at the moment it's halted, but I'm sure if any of you want to go on his Instagram, it's called the Creole Canteen. Yeah. Okay, so that I thought would set the pace where the Black Poor, their story has to be told, and we've been telling it. So let's go to the next slide I have and tell how it all began. Now, this is a book written by a friend of mine, Dele Ogo, and it's such a powerful title, A Slave Ship Called Jesus. The slave ship was actually, the ship was actually called the Jesus of Lobeck, and it was owned by Queen Elizabeth. Okay, the transatlantic slave trade, we talked about Britain being abolitionist, but we know that they were heavily involved in the slave trade. And Sir John Hawkins, I sometimes don't like calling him Sir, but John Hawkins started it all off by capturing 300 Africans in Sierra Leone and transporting them to the Americas. He did 4 journeys in total. He was a cousin of Francis Drake, by the way. And I am told that he actually taught Francis Drake his navigation skills when Francis Drake went around the world or whatever he did. Now, Queen Elizabeth I is a woman very unlike the current, well, Queen Elizabeth. She was pretty horrible, I think, and wanted to probably even drive out Black people from London as well. She loaned John Hawkins the ship called Jesus of Lobeck, gave him a unique coat of arms which had the drawing, an enslaved African on it. And of course, the Royal African Company they had a monopoly, and as a company, captured and sold about 100,000 Africans, more than any single company. So it was very, very ingrained in Britain, the whole slavery business. Yeah. We're going to talk about the Black Poor, who they were. Right. This is a drawing where from there you can see. Now, in the late 18th century, there were between 5,000 to 10,000 Black poor residents of London, mostly men. There were seamen, runaway, enslaved people. I'm going to avoid saying slaves. It's not a word I like using. Black seamen, freed servants. Some of the there were sailors who ran away as well from the ships. And then we have the Black American, the loyalists, who came from America. They were the people, I don't know if that's been spoken about, but I'm sure it has, who fought on the side of Britain during the American Revolutionary War, which Britain lost. So some were sent to Nova Scotia and some came to England. The majority did not come to England. It was a small amount that came to England. And they came, and all the promises, they thought they were coming to a land of anything better than slavery, but the promises were broken. And when they came, they faced poverty, prejudice. This is all, they met, they just joined the people before who were here already facing all this. And I found out that in 1731, one of the mayors put an apprentice ban so that none of these Black people could be apprentices anymore. So that again, made more destitution. So there's poverty, beggary, prostitution. There were some women who worked selling little baskets of things, but it didn't bring in a lot. So some turned to prostitution, and of course crime. There's so much crime going on. Obviously, poor people and all this sort of thing. Some of the men, Black men, married local women. And then there was this concern about the problem of Black people in London. So we'll see how that brings about the repatriation plan. Some historians don't believe it was all, well, it wasn't all altruism. I mean, they wanted to rid London of the sight of, poor Black people. And also the fact that there was a lot of mixed relationships. I don't think in those days people liked seeing that. So all these things, caused complaints about the Black poor in London. Right, I found, and this is one of the things I'm sure your previous speakers haven't, I'm going to see if I can remove because I want to be able to see my screen properly. I found a song called The Negro's Farewell to America. This was written in America, but apparently an enslaved, somebody who'd previously been enslaved, a Black loyalist, and it shows the sort of expectations these Black loyalists had. I hope some of you are reading this. We'll just read a little bit. They're saying adieu to their master and Missy. They're going away to London. They're not going to help make their slave owners rich anymore from the sweat of their brow. And I love this bit which says, farewell the yams and the salt fish, the bran and spruce beer, and all this sort of thing. And they're going to be eating roast beef and strong beer in England, old England. When we do get there, they didn't know what was coming. Farewell the mosquito, farewell, they're thinking they're going to a land of honey when they in London. And it seems as if they also sang about going to his friends in Guinea, the Guinea coast. So this is interesting. Before that, old England, he had Assini, oh God, some of this language. So they're saying farewell the cold winter. They don't, whether they didn't know England was cold, I don't know. Frost and snow and all this sort of thing that they left there is here, as we all know. But hey, I just thought that was a really interesting song. And if you Google the Negro's Farewell to America, you see that song on it, yeah? So let's move on. Now, when the Black loyalists were around, this is a quote from one of them called Peter Anderson, who he I think I read had been even captured by the Patriots, the white people who were fighting the English in America, and he escaped, I think, twice. So he'd been through quite a lot during the Revolutionary War in America. And when he came, this was something that, he was quoted as saying. He tried to find work. He's 39. ready and willing. It's verbatim, so his spelling and everything. Yes, see how he's starving about the streets. He has nobody to give him bread or anything. So this really does put a picture on what was happening with them. But he said he dare not go home because, of course, if they were sent back to America, they'd be recaptured. That's why, as slaves. So yeah. And he was awarded £10 by, they had a loyalist claims commission, which was set up when these loyalists were around, and, to compensate both Black and white loyalists. And of course, there was discrimination there as well. And the Black people, a lot of them did not get that compensation from the claims commission. Right. Of course, with all the poverty, some of you would have heard of the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. Some philanthropists such as Jonas Hanway, they thought they had to do something about the poor people roaming the streets of London with no food or anything. So they formed this committee, and the government was giving some money, but other people were giving, donations as well. And this was a sort of allowance. They gave 6p. In those days, I suppose was quite a lot per person. They dispersed the funds. And one of the places, they did it from several taverns, but one of them was called the White Raven Tavern in Whitechapel, which is kind of East London. And that's the pub. We call them pubs now, yeah. And I then found a list of the Black poor who were receiving some of the bounty from the government. All these things, Britain, England is really good at archives. The National Archives, some of which is online, although I've been to it in Kew Gardens. So this was from I think this was from the National Archives. The list of some of the people, and why I put this, I wanted to show, this is a husband and wife who I'll mention a bit later, but Joseph and Alamas were part of the ones receiving maybe that 6p, and all these other people were just a proportion of them. Again, I spoke about the National Archives. They have minutes of the meetings that took place between Jonas Hanway, who was the chair of the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. And this one was one of the minutes that actually mentioned, and there will be others that would have mentioned Sierra Leone. And obviously they call it Sierra Leone. And they speak about, first of all, the Black poor, they were offered the Bahamas and Nova Scotia, but they didn't think they'd get any joy there. And so they wanted, when they were offered Africa and Sierra Leone, and I'll tell you about in the next slide, I think, about the chap that spoke about that, suggested Sierra Leone. Now, but the interesting thing about this slide and these minutes is that they talk about a person residing in London who is a native of that country. Well, the person I'm going to tell you about is not a Sierra Leonean native, so I'm not sure. I think more research will have to be done to see who else was telling them that the Sierra Leonean natives are fond of the English and would receive them joyfully. Anyway, they resolved that. I'm not looking at the time, but I think we have a little time. So the person that was central in this Sierra Leone resettlement scheme, in that he planted himself in the middle of it, was a chap known as Henry Smithman. He was an adventurer, a botanist, an entomologist. He had the nickname Mr. Termite, who had been to Sierra Leone. Initially, apparently, Kew Gardens, there was a chap, when they were doing Kew Gardens is a place with a lot of plants in England. He was sent to go and see, what the fauna is like in Sierra Leone, etc. And he went there. So he'd been there. And when he came back, he was, I think, 40 something. And he happened to know about all this, obviously the Black Poor. And he suggested, he wrote his plan, a plan suggesting that they go to Sierra Leone, they be sent to Sierra Leone. And this is how he described it: one of the most pleasant and peaceful countries in the world. And, he created such an upbeat assessment of Sierra Leone, saying philanthropy, commerce, if people go there, they don't need much, they can plant all sorts of things, and the economy will boom and all that. And of course, what it turned out, he was a bit of a con artist, actually. And he planned to make himself money and had thought he'd have plantations there, not quite in the same vein as the ones in the, out in America. But he really thought he could make money out of people in Sierra Leone. But of course, we all know things were different. There was disease, harsh weather, and all sorts of things. And well, I was going to say as luck would have it, but maybe I should. He actually wasn't able to go through his plan because he died before the Black Poor were to embark and go to Sierra Leone. He died of a fever, and it might well have been during his trips to Sierra Leone. He probably caught something, so he didn't, make himself money out of the suffering of our people. Newspapers in England actually covered some of the stories around the Black Poor. This was a Leeds newspaper, and now in the olden days, they used to write S like an F and F like. It was so difficult to if you can see that West Indies, you can see it looks like an F, but thanks to a friend of mine, Adedarami, I could have done it, but Ade did it for me. He actually transcribed that. And the bit I want to show you, because not this whole thing, but the terminology used on Black people was terrible in those days. These wretches had been brought here chiefly as seamen to navigate English ships. Would you call, these are sailors who worked on English ships, and they're referred to as wretches. Then there's this bit about they're now embarking on board two ships, he says, on the River Thames, or settlement in Guinea, where they'll be encouraged to settle. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the Black people obviously had seen Jonas Hanway as they were beneficiaries of Hanway, and when he passed, they wanted to, attend to his grave and all that, but it wasn't allowed because one, they were Black, two, you can see it here, lest disorders might ensue from such an untraceable mode. Basically, they thought that they were going to spread disease. Yeah, so that was really a sad thing, to read. And Hanway passed, I think, prior to the ship's leaving as well. One thing I wanted to say about Jonas Hanway, just a sidetrack, he was actually the first person to hold remember, he was the first chair of the Committee for the Relief of the Black One. He was the first person to hold an umbrella in England. So I thought I'll give you that little snippet. Now, I said I'll speak about abolitionists who were not your typical abolitionists that you read about. Well, if you read a lot, you read about Equino. Now, Oladua Equino lived in Deptford, and there's a park not a million miles from me called Telegraph Hill Park, and I sometimes go up there for exercise. And once I went there and saw this sculpture that children had done of Equino, because Deptford is an area where he lived. So a school in Deptford actually did this out of a ceramic thing to mark his presence in the area. So not sure how the similarity is, but hey, there you go. At least it shows that children are learning about Black abolitionists. So that's, if you're ever, in London and you want to go up Telegraph Hill, just Google Telegraph Hill Park, it will come up. Equino was born in Nigeria. He was also called Gustavus Vassa. He was enslaved as a child, taken to the Caribbean. He purchased his freedom and came to London. He wrote his successful autobiography, but one of the things he did was founded a group called the Sons of Africa, and they were a Black abolitionist group made up of ex-enslaved people. And if you remember, I told you about Joseph Alamaz before, the one who was receiving with his wife. He was also a member of the Sons of Africa group. And they coupled or allied with people like the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade and Grenville Sharp and all those people, and they helped end the slave trade. So as I say, it was an effort of collaboration rather than just saying Wilberforce or that sort of thing. In fact, one activist I know in London, Black activist, he calls it William Wilberforce, but he's quite an activist. Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, so another thing Equino did was he actually worked for the Committee of the Sierra Leone Resettlement Scheme. Initially, he was in charge of provisions and stores, and when he realized that there was some embezzlement taking place and all that, he spoke out quite vehemently about that. And rather than taking his side compared to the new chair of the committee, they took obviously the white person's side, and he was sacked. So he did, that was something that happened with Equino. The other person I want to mention is Otabo Kugwano, another person who was part of the Sons of Africa. He's written his book as well. He was also called John Stewart, and he used to write to newspapers and even wrote to the royals, who, opposing abolition. So a plaque is at the Pall Mall, which is in central London, acknowledging his anti-slavery campaign. And yeah, all that. So that's another abolition. Again, on the National Archives, you will see the list of the Black Poor. They've shown it how it was written and also transcribed it. And on this one, this is just one of the ships. This was called the Venom. I mentioned somebody called Abraham Ashmore. And Abraham, okay, before I tell you about Abraham, one of the things I also wanted to say was that on those lists on the Black Poor, you'll see people who were women who were married to black men. You'll see intermarriages and all that. So, but those women who ended up in Sierra Leone as Black Poor were made out as the white women. They made them out as prostitutes, and historians have shown that that's really was probably likely not the case. They were actually married to these black men. That prostitution story came from a white lady who was in Sierra Leone called Anna Marie Falconbridge. Yeah, so there were mixed marriages. There were children on the boats and everything. So that went to Sierra Leone. Now I mentioned Abraham Ashmore, and he was, a Negro from America. He was born and baptized in a church in Greenwich. He left Deptford later that year for Sierra Leone on the ship called the Venom. I showed you his name on the list. He was literate. He became the first elected governor of Granville Town. And he was accused of selling one of his fellow settlers as a slave. And they thought they freed him through political reasons. But Michael would probably go more about what happened in Granville Town. So that was one of the people who came as a Black Poor that went to Sierra Leone. Now, one of my historian friends told me that Joseph Alamas, the guy who I said was on the ship with his wife, also went to Sierra Leone as, one of the Black Poor. But I scanned the list of the ships, which are all on the National Archives, and I couldn't find his name. So whether he used a different name or not, I wasn't able to tell which ship he went on. So he could well have gone as well, one of the Sons of Africa, who was campaigning against slavery. Abolition. Another person that went is somebody called Abraham Elliot Griffiths. He was mixed race and a protege of Grenville Sharp, who paid for his education. He supported the scheme. He also wrote to newspapers. He traveled on one of the other ships. I think I spelled it wrong, but it's the Belarus. And he was married to a white woman. And when his wife died, he moved to a part of Sierra Leone and became translator for Naimbana II. He was translator for the Sierra Leone Company, who were doing business in Sierra Leone in 1792. He supported Thomas Peters' views on running the colony. And of course, Thomas Peters' views included the fact that they weren't given enough, autonomy to run it themselves. So I suppose then Abraham Griffiths got into the bad books of the powers that be. He was accused of forging currency. He was actually imprisoned for debt and died in prison. Really very sad. So the ships were there about to depart for Sierra Leone, and they arrived on 15th May and became the first Creoles. Now I am going to stop sharing for now. I'm going to introduce Michael Siva to you. Yeah. So you can still hear me, right? Michael has studied Black history at every stage of his educational development. He received a BA at the University of the West Indies, where he studied history of the West Indies. In March 2013, he received his master's from the Open University, where he wrote his dissertation on Black Londoners being used as colonists in Sierra Leone. He then did a PhD at Southampton University, exploring the role of the Maroons in the Jamaican resistance movement against slavery. So you can actually see that Michael has studied both the Maroons and, you know, the Black Poor. And we actually, that's how we started conversing. Actually, we met at an event. I was out doing my sickle cell work, and they had a Jamaican stall that I went to. And Michael and I started talking. I think it was at the time he was doing the first bit on the Black. Yeah, his master's. So, and we've kept, and this must have been
years ago,
at least 6 years ago. And we're still in touch, and he's kindly agreed to come on and tell us a bit more about the Black Poor, and then I will come on again and talk about the markers. So take it away, Michael. I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you, Iyamide. And as Iyamide has said, I've known her many years, and I have to commend her for all the work she's done with regards to helping to inform Black British people about the history of the resettlement scheme in Sierra Leone. Can the host allow me to share the screen? I would like to do my do a slide presentation as well. My slides are not as attractive as Iyamide's, but I hope that they will be informative, and we'll be able to learn a bit from it, and we'll be able to discuss some of the points that are raised. There's going to be a little bit of overlap, naturally, with what Iyamide was showing us about the origins of Sierra Leone. And I'm going to just try and quickly go through those parts where there's an overlap, and just highlight some of the other areas that Iyamide obviously naturally didn't touch much on, because it's very well covered in British history. Okay, so as Iyamide said, I'd studied why did the Black Londoners not join the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme in the 1780s. Basically, the point was that, as a previous slide by Iyamide showed, there was a large number who initially signed up, but a lot of them withdrew. So why were this numbers so small coming out of London? So in order to look at that, we have to first of all look at, where did these Black Londoners come from? They weren't there in significant numbers before the 1780s. But what happened during the American War of Independence, Lord Dunmore, who was one of the British generals during that war, he offered enslaved people their freedom if they fought on the side of the Loyalists. What this meant was that thousands of enslaved people ran away from the plantations of the South and the plantations of the Patriots and joined the British. And in the process, when the war ended, all of a sudden the British government was, in a word, as the way they looked at it, stuck with a lot of Black soldiers who fought on their side. And the question was what to do with them. George Washington wanted them to be handed back into slavery in the newly independent United States of America. But British, in one of their rare moments of standing up for what's right, decided they're not going to do that. So most of them, they found a place for them to live in Nova Scotia. And a lot of Black men and Black women made a home in Nova Scotia, of which we will hear more about later on. As it turned out, it was not an ideal colony for a lot of Black Americans who were coming from the American South, where things were warm, temperature was warmer, etc. But there were quite a few, especially men, mainly men, Black men, who found work on ships, and in the process of working on ships ended up in London. Now, as Iyamide has pointed out, a large number of them, for various reasons, a law passed in 1731 which prevented them from gaining apprenticeship work, competing with British workers. They were forced into destitution. And this led to the establishment of the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. Iyamide has already spoken about the important role that Jonas Hanway and his colleagues played in that, but it had greater ramifications. What did the black poor do in London? Most of them were seamen, as Grenville Sharp wrote in his letters, and these were letters quoted by Prince Hoare, who wrote his memoirs of Grenville Sharp. Most of the black poor were men as well. Now, Norma Myers has also done quite a bit of research into various records, especially court records, in her outstanding work, Reconstructing the Black Past. And she found that of the black men who came to trial, because as Iyamide pointed out, a number of them fell afoul of the law, especially being forced into destitution. So between 1785 and 1830, of those who came to trial, 26% of them were sailors. This is comparison to white men who came up for trial during that same period, of which only 4% were sailors. So that shows what a significant number of black men found work as sailors. Equino also, at various stages, went back to the sea and worked on the ships whenever he got tired of dealing with the racism in Britain. A large number were also free servants during this period. This is at a time when less than 1% of white men in Britain were free servants. In this period of time, over 14% of black men were servants. These were the main two professions that were really open to black men in London in the 1780s, working as sailors and working as servants. Now, this brings us to Granville Sharp. Now, Iyamide quite rightly focused on Equino and Corguano because they tend to be overlooked in the general scheme of things. And what I just want to highlight here is just how Granville Sharp played a role in the establishment of the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme. He was an abolitionist, as we know. He worked very closely with Equino. In fact, Equino was the one who brought Sharp's attention to the case of the Zong, which was a horrible case, in which large numbers of enslaved people were thrown overboard into the sea, and an assurance claim resulted. And thanks to Equino bringing this case to Sharp's attention, this was probably a seminal moment which helped to shift public opinion against slavery. So they were good friends, they worked together, and Sharp had this belief that if he could help to set up a colony in Africa which was run by black people, it would show the doubters, the pro-slavery doubters back home in England, that contrary to what they believe, black people are not inferior to white people. Because the argument by the pro-slavery lobby was that we have to keep them in slavery because they're incapable of running their own affairs. He wanted the Sierra Leone scheme to show that no, that's not the case. They are the equal of white people. They can run their own country, and as a result, help to change public opinion. Well, as we'll see, there were many flaws with the establishment of the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme. So the question is, all right, we know that Granville Sharp had good ideas and had positive ideals when it came to Sierra Leone. But then a lot of people who supported the scheme did not. And that arose from concerns of the large number of black people that were being seen around London. No proper census was ever done, but you had a number of writers who were speculating on the numbers. Gilbert Franklin, who was one of the pro-slavery supporters, wrote a pamphlet where he alleged that there were 40,000 black people in England. Well, historians since then, such as Stephen Braidwood and Fullerton Shylon, have looked at figures and have estimated, based upon what they have seen, that the numbers were significantly less. 7,500 is what Braidwood said. Shylon said it was probably 10,000. We don't really know for sure, but I think it is more likely that Braidwood and Shylon had the more accurate figures. But I suppose what we have to understand is that for a lot of white people at the time, seeing significant numbers of black people, it was very easy for them to be scared into thinking that the numbers were closer to 40,000. So with that now, we had a lot of politicians saying that we need to remove a number of these black people. And so as a result, they started the scheme and say, all right, let's see if how many we can get signed up. And as Iyamide pointed out, about 700 signed up initially. But in the end, when the two ships actually left to go to Sierra Leone, only 441 actually turned up to sail on the ships to Sierra Leone. This represents, based on the last slide I just showed, less than 5% of the black population in Britain. So in effect, it failed in its political objective to remove black people from Britain. The vast majority chose to stay. In fact, the 700 that they were trying to get, they didn't even get that because a significant number did not turn up. So who are the politicians who were keen to remove black people from England? Well, here we are. Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger. He was a friend of Wilberforce because he did give token support to the idea of abolishing the slave trade. And he embraced Grenville Sharp's scheme. But the main reason he embraced it is because he wanted to get as many black poor out of London and back to Africa as possible. Because he felt that, all right, they're a problem here. We need to get rid of them. Out of sight, out of mind. The difficulty is that a lot of black poor were beginning to sense the vibe and we're beginning to get wind that the politicians want to get rid of us. Bear in mind also, a lot of the black poor in London were men. When they came over, most of them would have formed relationships and married white women. They would probably be more reluctant to get up and relocate unless their wives wanted to. If they have a white wife who has a white family in England, she's probably going to be less keen on going as well. So all of these factors were beginning to militate against the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme. So why did about half fail to turn up? There was suspicion that the British authorities wanted to deport them back to slavery or Australia. It certainly wasn't helped by the fact that there were also ships in harbour in the Thames at the time who were actually in the process of deporting convicts to Australia and were also in the process of being engaged in the slave trade. The slave trade was not abolished until 1807. This is the 1780s.
We'll leave in 20 minutes, okay, buddy?
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, no problem. I'll cut off a little earlier than that, just to give Iyamide a chance to come back in. So, with the numbers reduced from 700 to 400 and odd, the committee decided they needed to, well, it was actually reduced to less, to about 300, and that's when the committee started rounding up black beggars in the streets of London and putting them on the ship to increase the numbers. Now, two people that Iyamide highlighted were some of the leading critics. We have Otaba Koguano, we have Olada Equino, and as Iyamide mentioned, Equino was a commissary who accused Joseph Irwin, who was one of the white officers on the ship, of misuse of funds. And instead, Captain Thompson, after hearing the case, Captain Thompson took Irwin's side and dismissed Equino instead. Well, that was a mistake, because Equino then became an ardent critic of the scheme. And these are the criticisms that they both made. The colony, will be established near slave trading ports. Now, that is a recipe for disaster. If you're having a colony established in Sierra Leone and they're trading slaves in other parts of the coast of Guinea, on either side to the east or the west, there's a strong danger that there's going to be some conflict of interest, some overlap, and some problems. They also raise the issue that racial prejudice that the black poor have experienced in England has bred a lot of mistrust among the black poor. They're distrustful of the motives of these white politicians. And there are also black people who are now beginning to express fears that they will be forced to go to Sierra Leone. Well, the committee rounding up black beggars certainly did not help matters. So this is what Coguano said in his book, The Evil of Slavery. There is some reason to fear, and a burnt child dreads the fire. It can be readily conceived that government would establish a free colony for them near the spot while it supports its forts and garrisons to ensnare, merchandise, and to carry others into captivity. He said, Europeans have such a prejudice against black people so that a black man is scarce, even safe among them. And he goes on to say, make other criticisms about the issue. Well, it went further than that, though. It wasn't just the criticisms of Equino and Coguano who influenced a lot of the black poor to pull out of the scheme. Lord George Gordon, of whom we know very little about, but in 1780, Lord George Gordon was a leader of the Protestant Association, and he led an anti-Catholic demonstration with support from many seamen, including black sailors. There were riots in the streets of London. He was put on trial. But many sailors and seamen saw Gordon as one of the few people of authority who actually was concerned about the plight of the men who worked at sea. And this included, obviously, a lot of black seamen. So, what happened? Well, Robert Watson writes in The Life of Lord George Gordon, which was published in 1795, that Gordon resided in Jamaica for 6 months and, quote, he soon became disgusted with the innumerable scenes of barbarity which everywhere presented themselves. He saw with disgust and he felt with abhorrence the bloody treatment of the Negroes and resolved to exert all his power and abilities in order to improve their condition. All this is before the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme. So we can see now why the black poor would say, all right, we're not sure about this scheme. Let's go to Gordon and find out what his advice is. So they went to Gordon. And we have newspapers. There are lots of newspapers reports that have covered the whole Sierra Leone resettlement scheme from one aspect or another. And the Morning Herald wrote, 6 of the leaders of these poor deceived people, as they call them. You can already see the condescension in this newspaper because the newspapers realizing that the black people aren't doing what they're being told to do. So calls them poor deceived people. Captains of the hundreds and captains of the 50s. This is various groups of people. They would elect a captain. They came up last week from 2 ships, the Belisarius and the Atlantic, and this is at Gravesend, which is in the Thames, and waited upon Lord George Gordon to pray the continuance of his protection and to stop their sailing till the meeting of Parliament, that the public might know their unhappy situation. Then another newspaper, the Public Advertiser, had reported, some of the leaders of the 700 black poor submitted the new system to the consideration of the Right Hon. Lord George Gordon and requested his advice and opinion on the subject before they sailed for England. His lordship advised them not to go and pointed out to them the various miseries, rebellions, calamities, discredit, and final loss of liberty which had uniformly attended the settlement of foreign colonies by different nations of the earth. So he's one of the first, you could say, anti-imperialists. And he struck a chord with a lot of the black poor. So when he said, don't go, yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar, out of a few hundred took his advice and decided not to go. So we see these various criticisms by Coguano, by Equino, by Gordon. All of these contributed to the black poor saying, you know what, maybe I'm not interested in this anymore. And so as a result, the first colony in Sierra Leone just had about 400 people. As Iyamide mentioned, I've written on this, and this is an article which is in the public domain, which is largely based upon my master's dissertation. So if anybody wants to read further, they can find this article in the History Matters Journal, which is online. I will just briefly touch on, for about 5 minutes, part 2, why did the first settlement in Sierra Leone fail? Well, we know that the Belisarius and the Atlantic sailed from Gravesend to Plymouth in 1787. The number of white women married to black men was listed as 63 plus, as Iyamide pointed out, 7 waiting to be married. Now, during the course of that trip, the 50 people in all died, not just white women. White women, black men, black women, children died. And this is just from Gravesend to Plymouth. They haven't even left England yet. 24 were discharged. In other words, they behaved so badly that the officer said, go. They were quite happy to go. 23 ran away when they reached Plymouth. So the numbers are being depleted, even before they've left Sierra Leone. Some of the numbers, Iyamide showed this, the handwritten list. That's the original. This is just a transcription of some of the names of the white women who were married to black men, the names of some of the black women who were married to white men. Now, in the first list, I'm able to list the black husband. I didn't have the white husbands of whom the black women married. But these can be found in these 2 various books. Simon Sharma's Rough Crossings, Gregory Russell Hodges' book, The Black Loyalist Directory. Those books are both easily obtainable, and I believe they can also be found in the various libraries. Okay, Sierra Leone. So they departed. 96 passengers died on the voyage from Plymouth to Sierra Leone, which is a pretty high number considering is little over 400 were traveling. So we're talking about 1/5 of the crew of the passengers died. And Abraham Elliot Griffith, of whom you've heard, wrote a letter from Iyamide, who wrote a letter to the Public Advertiser saying, the people in general are very sickly and die very fast indeed, for the doctors are very neglectful to the people. So there's discontent as well. There's a feeling that the doctors are not paying enough attention to the black people, probably pay more attention to the white people. So when the ships left them in Sierra Leone in September 1787 to go back to England, the colonists had been reduced to 276 persons. And we see the breakdown there. This was written in a book by Wadstrom, who was another abolitionist at the time. So from 400 and odd down to 276. Numbers are declining already before the ships, just as the ships are even leaving. So Granville Town was founded, and about 50 white women are no more. Of all the settlement, not more than 250 people in all remain above ground, wrote Pettigrew in his book John Oakley Letson. Obviously, for white writers, the concern was what's happening to the white people first and foremost. But you can, when you read that and you read about their plight, you can also learn a little bit about what's happening to the people at large, whether they're white or black. Among the dead was Rebecca Griffith, the white wife of Abraham E. Griffith. Further 86 settlers died on the coast in the first 4 months after their arrival. A local chieftain, who we know is King Jemmy, attacked the settlement, dispersing most of the remaining 200 settlers. This was written in the director's report in 1791. Grenville Sharp then put together a relief expedition, but the news was so bad that they were only able to recruit another 39 black poor from London. The rest said, nope, we're not going. We're not taking part in this. When they reached there, they found that the colony had been reduced to a mere 64 settlers. Numbers had been decimated, and they were taking refuge at a place called Fora Bay. 39 black men, 19 black women, and 6 white women were all that were left. from the original, the first expedition that founded Granville Town. We've learned already about Abraham Elliot Griffith. Just to add to what has already been pointed out, these are some of the letters that he wrote when he was saying that the situation was really bad in Sierra Leone. And he later, and he's basically was saying that he felt that there would be very few of us left at the end of a year, end of a 12-month. And as he said, it is really a very great pity that we ever came to this country. This is a letter he wrote to Grenville Sharp. So Grenville Sharp turned to Nova Scotia. He had a discussion with the black pioneer, Thomas Peters, who was representing his fellow black loyalists in Nova Scotia, who were very unhappy with the very cold conditions there. And they wanted to go to Sierra Leone. Grenville Sharp said, all right, we have a large number of black people wanting to go there. We can't get any from England. Let's get from Nova Scotia. By this time, you have about 3,000 black pioneers living in Nova Scotia when John Clarkson was sent there by Grenville Sharp. Who's John Clarkson? He was the younger brother of the famous abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, and he was the first governor of Freetown, not elected, of course. That's a slightly different scenario. He was appointed by the company to be the first governor of Freetown from 1791 to 92. Now, in the end, just under 1,200 left Nova Scotia for Sierra Leone, and a much smaller number died en route, 65. Ship landed on 20th of October 1792. 1,026 survived, according to the Gentleman's Magazine of 1793. Sadly, John Clarkson labelled the old settlers from Granville Town as a bad influence and banned them from mixing with the new colonists of Freetown, as if they haven't suffered enough. Griffith was the official, who was probably one of the highest left black people left with any form of influence. He eventually succeeded in persuading Clarkson to allow these survivors to join the Nova Scotians, which is probably the last significant act of Abraham Elliot Griffiths. Then there was a rebellion in 1800. Nova Scotians found the conditions hard in Sierra Leone. They granted the weather was better than Nova Scotia, but conditions were difficult. They complained that they cannot get justice from the white people. They rebelled in 1800. However, Jamaican Maroons, who were being deported via Nova Scotia, arrived just in time to help the British put down the rebellion. And this is where the roots of the nation of Sierra Leone were born, as all these groups came together to coalesce to create quite a mix that formed Sierra Leone. And just on this particular section, the failure of the first colony, lots of information I have can be found in Simon Sharma's Rough Crossings and Graham Russell Hodges' The Black Directory, African Americans in Exile After the Revolution. Okay, at this point, I'll wrap up and I'll hand over to Iyamide. Let me stop share.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Michael. That was very comprehensive. And you can see that's coming from the angle of a historian. So I thought I'd just give, show you that leaving a footprint is important. Educating people is important. We all know that. And for those who were unable to go to the exhibition, this is just a snapshot of what it looks like at the Museum of London, Docklands. There's quite a lot online, including a short video tour that Melissa, who co-curated it with me, did. So it's on YouTube. So if you just put Creoles of Sierra Leone, a lot will come up. Yeah. Specific to the Black Poor, there's a museum in Lewisham, South London, called the Migration Museum. And when I heard they were doing an exhibition last year called Departures, I contacted the curator, they were doing an exhibition called Departure of Emigration out of England from the year, God knows what century. But they'd never heard of, they didn't know about the immigration and the Black Pause. So I told them a bit about it, and I'm glad to see they included that in the exhibition. The departures, the way the museum was set up was like almost like an airport. That's why you see gate 3 there. So there's the Black Pause section, and they wrote a bit about the Black Pause there. So that's another thing that was really important, that we're putting, this was obviously a temporary marker, but at the same time, putting markers is great. Talking about markers, this is Dr. Africanus Horton, and I'll tell you a bit about him in the next slide. He was at King's College, University of London, also my alma mater, and that's a pavement, and they had a wall, or they should still have it, of their notable alumni, and I'm happy to say Horton was one of them. And similarly, the University of Edinburgh actually has a permanent plaque on Africanus Horton because he was the first African graduate of the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So these are markers that are there, so, and they have a statue in Sierra Leone. I was able to find my picture of that, but it's up by Wilberforce. They have a statue of Africanus Horton and then names of doctors and health medical people who contributed to Sierra Leone's health system. Yeah. Another mark. Okay, I said I'd go quickly for those that don't know who Dr. Africanus Horton was. He was born in the Gloucester village. His parents now were liberated Africans. They were Igbo from Nigeria on their way to slavery when the slave trade was abolished, and the British were sending ships. The British Navy was intercepting slave ships, and Africanus Horton's parents' ship was intercepted and brought to Sierra Leone, and he was born in Sierra Leone from these enslaved people descendants. And there you go, he was educated. He came to, got a scholarship to come to King's College and Edinburgh University in 1859. I always say it's very important for young people to see these dates and know that people were coming from Africa and going to universities, that were top-notch universities and excelling there. It's always really important, and which is why the exhibition had a notable Creoles section of it to show these notable pioneers, really. He changed his name to Africanus. Proud of his roots. He wasn't born Africanus. He was born James Bill Horton. He was in the British Army as a medical doctor. He spent a lot of time in Ghana, wrote books about medicine, geology, and politics, wrote about African independence long before all the other people were thinking about it. And he also wrote a book which described the disease we now know as sickle cell. He wrote his in 1874, much earlier than 1910, when the discovery of sickle cell is thought to have happened in the West. Yeah. Another marker, Untold Stories. This is what markers do. This was on a road in Shoreditch, for those that know London. They did RAF, the people in the RAF, and there's Johnny Smythe, who was in the Royal Air Force, who fought in World War II. So it's really important. Again, he was another notable career that I covered in the exhibition to show people that Sierra Leoneans took part in World War II, and he was even held a prisoner of war and stayed there for over more than a year in a German camp. And that's a marker. People driving there would have seen that. And this is for the heroes that you haven't heard of. Yeah. I just thought I'd show you some other connections, because London is where it all, well, in my opinion, it started, the transatlantic slave trade in John Hawkins. And in a way, you can say it ended. Lloyd's Bank insured the slave ships. I don't know how many of you know that. The other day I was on a walking tour of the City of London, and you can see the Lloyd's Bank building. It's quite an unusual architecture. The Bank of England was heavily involved in slavery, and they even have an exhibition now called Slavery in the Bank. So if you go online, you'll see aspects of that exhibition. I went there in person the other day, but it's also online. Of course, people know the Amazing Grace hymn, and that's going to be 250 years this year. John Newton, who was previously a slave owner, and he stayed there. Usually there's a village in Sierra Leone named after him. Plantain Islands is where he stayed. And yeah, so look out for celebrations around that. Amazing Grace. This was one of the items I had in the exhibition, and it was a dish given to the museum actually had it in their collection. It was a dish given to the superintendent of the liberated Africans, who were the bulk of the Creoles. So yeah, notable markers in the UK, I've covered that. And there's an African Academy in Clapham, which was a school that children from Sierra Leone came to, and this was when slavery was going on. We're talking about the very early 1800s. It's still there, the Clapham sect, which was made up of abolitionists, and so Clapham has a really good Sierra Leone history, and I've been on a walking tour of that, and we're trying to organize one. Yeah. Oh, that was the wording to Joe's poem. And the most important bit to me is, "For the plight of the Black boy still in the air, you're the forefathers of the Creole man's soul, and we really must ensure your story is told." I just thought I'll give you, for anybody that wants to look up the creoles.com, who, I do a lot of stuff on behalf of the group as part of the creoles.com team. If you want to email me, you can send it through the Gmail account. You can join our Facebook, the creoles.com. We put things there. We have a website, and we want people to contribute articles because we're more active on the Facebook page. And that is it. So I shall stop sharing.
Wonderful, wonderful, yeah. Wonderful. Quite exciting. Heritage, history, and connections. I believe from what we've heard, the details about the Black Pearl. Now they're not just this one bundle of folks that we hear of. We now get a feel where they came, their stories, where they came from, the resistance they did put up in London with regards to their own liberty, and even the whole details that from Michael Siva regarding the journey, the Black Pearl, the decisions that the Blacks had to make, whether to take up the offer or not to go. That whole conscious decision to figure out what was this opportunity. Is it better than the current post situation? Is it one? I mean, those are all news to me. That the names have come out. They're active. They're actually living folks. There are stories you can pick up and follow. I think that's what this session has done for me. And I mean, I know I'll be coming back to listen to it carefully and following up. So this was really a wealth of information from yourself, Iyamide, and Dr. Silva on this section.